It's raining, so my plans have been changed. I had planned to go back out again today and do some supplemental video on this series of saws. I just finished doing a whole bunch of test cuts with them, right? This is sort of a preamble to the video. We're looking at a 365 that I built, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago with 1194. A no base gasket build, and ran for a long time. Came back with some running issues, and I wish I had videoed the thing when I first took the cover off, but carburetor was pushed off to the side and all twisted up because somebody had taken the cover off, put the air filter on, and then jammed the cover on top of the air filter, twisting the carburetor. And it ran a little funny, but it ran probably like that for a long time. But the video was originally about a Farmertech Huztl 361 kit saw that I had built from a box of parts from them versus a Husqvarna 357 XP that had a highway top end. That was the genesis. Maybe I'll fold in some of the video where I put together that 357 because it's pretty funny. And you've seen the video of me putting together that 361. Did that quite a while back. Did that when I was all twisted up in a rehab for my hip. Doing much better now, thank you very much. Being rainy and all that, I decided let me throw some more saws in there just to get a test cut on those as well. Then when I get out to the woods, I'm looking at all those saws, and it very quickly morphed to not just 357 versus 361. My mindset was to try to run all those different saws and get times one relative to the next, you know, see which one's stronger and all that. Pretty much a mindset a lot of people have. And it kind of dawned on me that this sort of is sort of a twisted logic because you really don't learn as much as you think. And then I went into this monologue, which I'm not going to put on video, where I explained each of the different saws and the differences in the builds. The point I was trying to make is all you're really getting in those cookie cutting videos is saws with a particular build as compared to other saws, but they don't represent all the saws of that particular model. For example, I had a stock 562 and I had my modified 562. The stock 562 is a better representation of that class of saw than my modified one. My modified one doesn't represent the 562s well at all because it's not stock. You know what I'm saying? So when you start seeing these videos, you have to consider the state of tune the saw is in, whether it's been modified somewhat or not, but also whether or not someone spent the time to get the carburetor tuned right on a particular day. Sometimes you just pull them out of the garage and run them, like I did. Those carbs weren't tuned properly on that given day. They were good enough because it ran, but they weren't tuned to maximize power on that given day. In addition to things like bar and chain. Unless you have exactly the same chain and exactly the same bar, which we can't do because we have the steel versus Husqvarna mount, it's really hard to do those comparisons in a scientific way. So basically you have all these variables. You have chain, you have the state of the tune, did someone poke a hole in the muffler, does someone pull a base gasket or deck the cylinder, has it been ported, was the carburetor tweaked properly, all that stuff, not to mention things like the condition of the wood, the operator, whether he pushes hard or does a good cut on one versus the other. So really what you get is just sort of a general idea. There are so many other variables that unless it's an order of magnitude difference in the way it cuts, you really are not getting that as a takeaway. What you're getting is those two saws in that particular day and in the configuration they are have that relative performance difference, but they don't necessarily represent all the saws of that model. And that's a very important point. So I think what I'm going to do now is do a little bit of backdrop video on how I put together the 357. I never did get that 361 running as crisp as I want. I also really haven't got the 357 with the highway top end as stable as I want. So there's more power to be had in those two saws. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I'm rambling. Let me get on to the video. And I think this right here falls into the category of you gotta see it to believe it. This saw was exhibiting air leak symptoms. Couldn't get the thing to idle and just wasn't running cleanly at all. This saw is from the same outfit, and I'm not going to give you their name. The one thing I can tell you is this is not the local Husqvarna dealer. But this came from the same outfit that had put that screw in one of the other 357s. You know, and I was trying to block up that auto decomp thing. Now apparently these people put a new top end on it. And what I'm looking at is a cheap aftermarket. You know, it was this is a 357 XP, and they put a cheap aftermarket 359 top end on it. But some of the problems we have here is there is no gasket of any kind. And the second thing is, take a look at that ring. You see a problem with that ring right there? Does that look about right to you? What could possibly be wrong with this darn saw? It should run like a top, right? So here I am, cleaning up somebody else's mess. And this is how come I don't like using aftermarket stuff. I'd much rather use OEM. So the whole idea here was just to put this thing together, and had I used OEM parts for an extra $25, my saw would be together. But no, I put it together hoping things would go together because it's a higher quality aftermarket part. Guess what? Freaking skirt of the piston taps on the crank, so now I have to take a thing apart, mess up a perfectly good goo gasket, and then take a die grinder and nick those skirts so that this darn piston will actually fit in there. And that costs you money. So whatever money I saved, whatever it was I saved going aftermarket, I just cost myself because I had to pull this whole freaking thing apart. I can deal with that. Well, here we are. It's kind of a gloomy late summer, early fall time frame. It's actually fall now. And it's been just raining for weeks. Fortunately, well, unfortunately, I've also been recovering from my hip replacement surgery, and I feel now that I'm, you know, at a point where I can get out in the woods and start doing things in moderation, but I sure feel better this week than I did last week. Things are moving in the right direction. Dr. Michael Clark at SOS, I think, did a nice job because here I am. I have a whole bunch of saws. I've got an OEM 2172 over there, the Jonsered, and I've got a pair of OEM 562s. This one here is absolutely stock, and you saw this in that video that Bob and I did late last fall running them 562s. This one had a 24-inch bar on it at the time. But before that saw had spent a fair amount of time with a logger. It's got a lot of time on it. It's a little tired, but it's an OEM 562 that I think does a good job of representing that class of saw. It's a 2014 model. This one here is a 562 that has a little higher compression, and I had built this also out of one of the early versions, and the only thing that's current is that cover. Everything else was junk that I basically massaged into a running saw. I think I did put an EL48 on it too. I can't remember. I can tell you right now that this one here runs a little stronger because it has a little bit better compression. It's a little bit more efficient. And we've gone into that discussion about how getting the squish band right takes that ring of gas air that might not be burned in a larger squish band saw and squeeze it into the combustion chamber where in fact does get burned. So you get an efficiency increase along with what you get with just compression, right? No other 562 other than a modified one runs like that saw. So I can't go run this one against a bunch of other saws and say, see, the 562s outrun X, Y, or Z. This one here is a no base gasket build kit saw from Farmer Tech. And other than that, that's about the only thing that's not as it came out of the box. I had to replace that because the one that came out of the box was defective and broke immediately. That one has no base gasket. It's a 357 with a highway top end. It's unique because it has an aftermarket top end. It's got a Highway Guys, not mine, not me, not Highway as a brand, but Highway as a employee type screwdriver modified muffler. And when I measured the squish, that cylinder piston combination without the base gasket gave me a squish right about 20 thousandths. So this is probably going to be a snappy saw. Because of all the different variables, you can't make the assumption that on one given day with one given saw that it represents all the saws of that particular model. You know, not just squish bands like you have all the variations right here, but bar and chains, the sharpness of the chain, the condition of the wood, the tune of the carb. Has someone spent the time to maximize the power of a saw? You know, with all those variables in play, the only thing that you can get is you get a ballpark idea of how those saws can run. Doesn't mean you can't make them run better, and it doesn't mean that in other configurations they might run worse. Alright, there's a 562. That's 2172, pretty much stock. Here's the kit saw, and about the only thing I did on this right here was I modified the tank vent. That's it. I want to point out that adding fuel to the top didn't really change how that saw ran at all. So we got some stuff going on in that one I haven't quite figured out yet. All right, the next three. Hilltop Saw Shop 562, a 357 XP with a highway top end, and a FarmerTech Huztl MS 036. That's a good running saw right there. That's really good running saw. Because it's a good running saw, I want to take one more cut on this darn thing. This right here is the saw that I've been using a lot the last couple of years because it has less weight and it vibrates less. The ultimate old man saw I built was really an update on this concept, and that was a very successful build, but every once in a while now I take this thing out and run it and realize this thing's a lot of fun. This is a great saw right here. I like it. I have to tell you, of all the saws here today, that 562 I think is my favorite. Now, that doesn't really have a whole lot to do with who's faster and better and all that. It has a lot to do with I built that saw and it was a very successful build. So let's just get that out in the open. All right, next up, 357 with a highway top end. Pretty strong, but it needs a little more fuel. I guess that's all right. It doesn't run bad. Had to give it a lot more fuel. I don't think I've got a tank for this issue. I just think it needs more fuel. cuts like it does, it's not going to win any races, but it'll put firewood on the truck, you know? Bob used to say. Between the two Farmer Techs, I don't know. I think the 361 has a lot more potential, and it may show it in the video. Neither one of them are running just right. And I think there's something to be said that all three of the aftermarket base saws, they're not running just right, you know? And I don't know if it's the top ends or the carburetors. On this one here, I'm pretty sure it's the controls and the carburetor. On the 361, I'm also pretty sure it's the carburetor. I know they both vac test quite well. They're sealed up. And the carburation is just not quite right on either one of these saws. Between the two of them, I think the 361 runs a little bit better as it comes out of the box. I also think the 361 has more potential. So that would be my choice should a person get kits, is to get the 361 over this one. Part of it is I've had a lot of issues with the oil pumps, the aftermarket oil pumps on these. Don't know yet on the 361. I don't know if it's the same damn pump, but this one right here I've had issues with. And the other thing is I've never quite got the controls on this right, you know. And I mean, it runs, it cuts. For what it is, it'll cut pretty good. My hunch is it's pretty stable. The way it runs right now is the way it's been running for a while, and it doesn't stop. I'm not seeing any signs of trauma in the cylinders. I've checked. Just doesn't quite run crisp, you know. When you get used to the 562s and the newer saws, that quick throttle response, ease of starting, and things like that tend to stick with you. So when you go back to one of these kit saws, it doesn't quite feel as good as, say, that 562 did. I think the time's going to bear it out too. Now, the 357, that thing runs all right, but it also's got, it's not quite right either, and I'm not quite sure what it is. Again, that's one that I vac tested, and it passed the vac test. Maybe it just needs to break in, not sure. Seems like it has decent power, but not quite where I want it to be, not just yet. I'm not quite sure what its issue is. And it could be simply carburation. It could be just the way the top end is. Now remember, that's the top end. That's a highway top end that I had to go die grind a little bit off the skirt of the piston because it didn't quite clear the crank. Stuff like that drives me nuts. But the question always is, if you have those kind of issues, are there other issues? You know what I'm saying? Saws that we ran right here, my 2172 probably has the most power. It kind of felt that way. My 562 Hilltop saw shop saw feels really nice to me. Of all the saws here that I'm running, that would be my pick. The 562 stock is not that far behind, and then the rest of these saws, probably the 357 and the 361, you throw a blanket over them for me. If that 361, if I can debug that 361, I'd probably pick it over the 357 because it feels lighter and it has a little more throttle response. And again, that's based on those two samples. I don't want in any shape or form to say that those two samples represent all the 357s or all the 361s. And my guess is that a 361 steel would be even better than that one. Of course it would. It has to be. What's next? I am tempted. It's probably pointless. But the 372 kit saw that's sitting on that would probably slot right between the 562 and the 2172. And of all the kit saws I've run to this point in time, that one there, even though I had to change a bunch of stuff, as I said in the video, that's the nicest build. All right, I want to do a short video, and I want to discuss two of the more popular kit saws. All right, this one here is based on a 372 Husqvarna, and this one here is based on a 361 steel. All right, this one here is a full 70cc saw. This one's not. This is quite a bit smaller. Now I pretty much videoed the assembly of both these kits. I did these and posted up the assembly. I had to do some changes and swap out some parts on this 372. I decked the cylinder and I had some other issues. And I documented those and I had made some recommendations. Turned into a pretty good running saw. Now this is the 361 and I just finished putting it together, and really I haven't had to change out any parts other than a broken chain brake handle to this point in time. But it's not just running perfectly well. It's not quite right just yet, you know what I'm saying? So between the two kits, at the end of the day, just to get to the end of the story, this turned into the best saw in terms of power and how it runs. It's a very good running saw. Idles good, starts good, does all those things. Vibrates more than an OEM saw would, but that's to be expected. And power-wise, it's pretty close to the OEM saw that it was derived from. And if you compare this kit saw built properly with the right squish, and that's another whole story. If you go back into my video, you'll remember that I actually decked that cylinder to get the squish right. Not everybody has that capability, and that's one of the strikes against this saw, is the fact that you do have to do some work like that to get it to perform at its best potential. But built the way I have it, it's a match of an OEM X-Torque. I think I did a video a little while back that pretty much documented that. But it's turned into a saw that day-to-day life is not bad. Like I said, it starts easy, it idles, it doesn't stall, it cuts, it has good power, it restarts, and because it has the inboard clutch, changing the bar and chain and doing those kind of things is pretty easy. And also because it's based on the Husqvarna 365, 372 series, you can pretty much swap in OEM parts at will and improve this saw. Start from this and build it to something better. And if I remember correctly, in addition to decking the cylinder, I did things like I had to struggle with the intake boot. My humble opinion is if you started with one of these kits and then got a better top end with an OEM boot and a better carburetor, that's quite the saw right there. That's a very useful machine. The cases, if I remember correctly, and I think I stated it in the video, were actually pretty good quality. The crank and bearings, well, time will tell. I have built a saw based on those bearings and seals back in 2014 that's still running. So if that's an indication, being a sample of exactly one, this one should last pretty long as well. But this one right here, I've been trying to develop it. I've had some struggles. The carburation isn't just right, but it's a lighter saw. It's a lot lighter, and again, it has the inboard clutch, which I like for changing bar and chains. And when I get the mixture right on this saw, it seems to have decent power for the size of saw that it is. And I'm going to develop this saw out because of all the kits. Right now, it fits my life the best because of its weight. Decent enough power with a lightweight bar on it. And but anyway, there's my humble opinion. I don't know if you noticed, but it cuts pretty well. It cuts pretty strong. But you notice it goes right back to idle and then starts right back up. And it didn't lose its tune after getting a little bit warm. Just a lot more stable a saw than the 361 is at this point in time.